Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. This is our Real Impact series with Dennis Henson. Once again, as we dive into a couple of the stories, or a story in this edition, of the Real Impact Daily Inspiration book. Dennis, welcome back. It is always a pleasure to see you and hear you and to have these conversations, and I'm hoping they are indeed inspiring to those who are listening and watching.
Thank you very much, Richard. I really appreciate you having me.
This is this is a lot of fun. We're going to dive into one of the stories that we're going to talk about today, having to do with actually a movie was made from this particular individual's life story as well. And the title of the story in your book, of course, is The Legend of Rudy. Let's take a listen.
The Legend of Rudy. It wasn't the top-rated movie in 1993. It came in 69th. It wasn't even the highest-ranked college football film that year. Yet Rudy became a film classic that has motivated thousands with its touching story of a boy's struggle to make his dream a reality. Daniel Rudiger was born in Joliet, Illinois in 1948, the third of 14 children. Rudy, as he was called, lived in a small home outside Chicago. His father was a miner who barely earned enough to feed his large family. Still, as bad as things were, he loved to watch Notre Dame football on Saturdays in the fall. Rudy also loved Notre Dame and dreamed of someday playing for the Fighting Irish. So the first day he was eligible, he signed up for Joliet Catholic Academy's varsity football team. Rudy practiced hard, earned a starting position, and led the team in tackles in his final 2 seasons. Unfortunately, he wasn't built like a football player. He was only 5'6" and weighed just 165 pounds. But Rudiger strove to compensate for his slight build by giving every play 100% of what he had. He didn't just play hard, he also talked tough. And it was no secret that he planned to become a member of Notre Dame's Fighting Irish. Of course, when his classmates heard that, they got a good laugh. "Rudy, you're nuts! It's impossible!" And almost everyone at Joliet believed Rudy had no chance of suiting up for the Irish. After all, Notre Dame could recruit the best players from anywhere in the nation. Why, in a million years, would they ever consider anyone like Rudy? That's simply impossible. However, one person didn't laugh at Rudy, and even encouraged him to go for his dream. That was his father's best friend, Pete. Pete listened to Rudy and offered him advice. But one day, Pete was killed in an accident at his job. Young Rudiger, though grief-stricken, vowed to take Pete's recommendations and pursue his dream. So after graduating high school, he moved to South Bend, Indiana, where he hoped to become a student at his beloved college. Unfortunately, he didn't qualify to enroll. Noticing his disappointment, a helpful priest suggested he apply to Holy Cross Junior College as a stepping stone to entering Notre Dame. The bar at Holy Cross was lower, and Rudy was accepted. Although Rudy was dedicated and worked hard to earn high marks, he had dyslexia, which made reading and studying slow and challenging. His disability made achieving good grades arduous. Rudy turned in applications each of the subsequent 5 semesters just to be rejected again and again. Yet his desire to play for the Irish was stronger than ever. So he spent as much time walking the university's grounds as he could. On one campus visit, Rudy spotted a flyer touting a groundskeeper position and jumped at the chance. While working on campus, he had access to and explored the tunnels of historic Notre Dame Stadium. From the front of the Hesburgh Library, he admired the 68-foot mural of the Word of Life, also known as Touchdown Jesus. But when the midday sun reflected from the golden dome of Notre Dame's main building, he closed his eyes and saw himself donning the golden helmet of the Irish. If Rudy had been motivated before, he was now on fire. So he renewed his vow that somehow, some way, he was going to dress in the blue and gold and take the field with the Fighting Irish. Although he doubled down on his studies, he knew his time was running out, and he realized his dream would be dead if he was rejected once more. You see, Notre Dame didn't accept senior transfers, so Rudy prayed and submitted his application for the final time. When the verdict was announced, it was good news. Rudy's dream was still alive, but being accepted as a football player would be a much higher hurdle. Most college teams allow walk-ons, and Notre Dame was no different. His problem was that only 2 walk-on positions were available, and Rudy would compete against 15 top-quality players. Nevertheless, Rudiger approached the tryouts as if his life depended on it. When the whistle blew, you wouldn't have wanted to be standing in front of him. He poured every ounce of courage and fight he had into those tryouts. And to everyone's amazement, Rudy Rudiger was selected as one of the chosen 2. Overjoyed, he knew he had come a long way, but his real dream was to suit up in the blue and gold and play in a real game. And though making the team was a giant step, the next step would require the heart of a champion. Scout teams consisted of players who, at practice, played against the first string. They were the guys who took all the blows and got little, if any, glory. But that didn't bother Rudy. He was determined to do his part to help the Fighting Irish win regardless of his position. So day after day, the pint-sized defender battled those enormous 5-star players. His effort displayed the meaning of heart, passion, and devotion. Rudy played bruised, he played hurt, and he put all he had into every play. Even facing pushback from some of his teammates, he never gave an inch. Fortunately, his efforts didn't go unnoticed by the elite players he faced every day. They came to love and respect him for his selfless actions. As his final season of eligibility approached, some of the team's leaders encouraged him to tell Coach Parsegian about his dream, so Rudiger gathered his nerve and knocked on the coach's door. Ara Parsegian realized how hard Rudy had worked and promised to play him in at least one game next season. Rudy was thrilled and believed his dream was about to become a reality. He could see himself donning a gold helmet and running onto the field of the most historic stadium in college football. He couldn't wait for his family and the many doubters to see it. However, Parsegian stepped down as coach at the end of the season and was replaced by Dan Devine. Devine wasn't aware of Ara's promise or Rudy's hard work, and he was much too busy to discuss anything with a player on the scout team. So when fall brought about a new season, Rudy continued to do his very best at every practice. Once again, he slammed those big guys with all his might and strove to keep everyone's enthusiasm high on the practice field. As the games came and went, the Irish were having a good year. Boston College was a win, Purdue a win, and Northwestern also a win. However, the next game was a loss at Michigan State, and with that, Coach Devine became even more focused on righting the ship and certainly had no time for an individual player's dream. Wins against North Carolina and Air Force followed, but with a loss to Southern California, Rudy could feel his hopes evaporating. The Irish did come back to defeat the Navy, but Georgia Tech was the last game on their schedule, and everyone knew that the Yellow Jackets would not be pushovers. Rudy's teammates were aware of Coach Parsegian's promise, yet none of them dared try to influence Coach Devine, especially this year, so no one said a word. In the Georgia Tech game, Notre Dame built a healthy lead, and as the game's conclusion approached, the Irish could have won by simply running out the clock. But Rudy's teammates knew there would probably never be another chance for him to play if the game ended. So the team leader persuaded the quarterback to try to score rather than running out the clock. If Notre Dame could score, the defense would have to re-enter the field, giving Rudy one more chance to play. Their plan worked, and they scored. Coach Devine was dumbfounded. He couldn't believe his eyes. What in the heck is going on here? At that point, some Irish players started chanting, "Rudy, Rudy," and soon others joined in. As the chant began to get louder, "Rudy, Rudy," the cheerleaders and some of the home crowd picked up the mantra. Then his family and friends joined in, and even some coaches followed suit. The sound of "Rudy, Rudy, Rudy" rang out in Notre Dame Stadium. Then finally, Coach Devine caught on, and with a scowl, motioned for the defensive coach to send in Rudiger. Well, it may seem like no big deal, Rudy's lifelong dream was realized. And for the next 2 plays, Rudiger donned his golden helmet and proudly wore the blue and gold for his Fighting Irish. On his first play, he was stopped and couldn't reach the runner. But on the second, he broke through an elite Yellow Jacket line manned by 300-pound players. Then little Rudy Rudiger tackled Georgia Tech's quarterback for a loss on the game's final play. A mighty roar rose from the fans as the Irish band played their famous Notre Dame fight song, the Victory March. There were smiles and high fives from Rudy's family. Once the final seconds ticked off the clock, Rudy's teammates lifted him on their shoulders and carried him off the field. This was the only time in Notre Dame's history a player was carried off by his teammates. So the legend of Rudy began and lives on. Even today, although Rudiger played only 2 plays, he not only realized his dream, but also accomplished the impossible and provided encouragement to nameless thousands. Focus on your dream and never quit. It is always too soon to quit. Rudy Rudiger.
The Legend of Rudy. It's available through your book and through the website, realimpactbook.com, where you can get a free Kindle version if you have the unlimited Kindle version of Kindle. We hope that you will. Dennis, this particular story is fascinating from lots of different perspectives. Why did you choose to include this particular story?
I'm glad you asked that, Richard. The story aligns with the core themes of the book of personal commitment, overcoming adversity, plus it's inspirational and cathartic. You know, there's places in the story where tears will come to my eyes when I read it, and I've read the story many, many, many times in preparing the book. I was inspired when I saw the movie Rudy, and anytime I saw a story or a movie or read a book or anything that had an inspirational story, I collected that. So in this instance, I simply wrote it in the book that this would be a great story to add to my training because Rudy went through so much. So that's why I added it.
I'm curious also as to how, where you came to find out about this story, and of course, where can we learn more about Rudy as well? I'm sure there's a book that the book was probably used to create the screenplay, which is usually the case.
The research that I did for Rudy was on YouTube, Google, and then I actually watched the movie 5 or 6 more times. Between all of those, I would write a piece, then I would research it, augment it, and edit it, give it to someone to get out all the errors. Because when I first started writing, I was really so bad. I gave one of my real estate books to one of my students who was really good at editing, and he edited the first chapter and gave it back to me and got all the mistakes out. And I said, well, how long do you think it would take to finish the book? And he said, the rest of my life. And he was serious. That's how bad it was. So that was, 6 years ago. I've gotten a lot better. When I write something and give it to someone now, it rarely has many mistakes in it, but I've come a long way.
Well, all I remember when mine was published, and my the PR gal that is helping me to get it out there, she read it, and even my mother read it, and of course they were a little picky, which was fine. I mean, I can use all the help I can get, and I was actually encouraged by the comment that the PR gal made. She says, "Don't worry about the mistakes in your book. Some of the greatest authors down through history, there have been errors found in the manuscript or the book once it was published. So you can feel like you're in good company in that regard. And yeah, we want to make sure that it's as accurate and it's a punctuation and spelling and all of that. But hey, you can only do so much and so forth, in spite of the fact that we have spell check and grammar check and all those kinds of things. So it's an extraordinary process, and I'm pleased that you have someone. There's somebody in my life who has actually offered to be a proofreader, and those are very important when you're putting together books like this, aren't they?
Absolutely. I have a lady My secretary has been with me for 23 years,
Wow.
and her mother works for me. So her mother's really good. Her name's Kathy. She's really good. She can read anything and find, if I missed a comma, if I misspelled something. She's just super at doing that. So that's a perfect fit for an author to have someone in their office that's like
Mm,
that.
absolutely. I've also learned about correct grammar when I shared my sister, my second oldest sister, is a proofreader as well, and I sent a manuscript to her once, and it came back with I had this one line that had a list of things. And I learned in school in English, you put a comma after every one of those elements except the last two, where you put the word and. Well, she had taken all the commas out and put in the word and. And I'm thinking, oh, that's not right. I mean, based upon what I knew. Then I did some checking. And what I found out was it was perfectly correct the way that she had punctuated it. That was just another form. So I didn't call her to say anything to her, because she was right as well. So we learn something, don't we, as writers, as authors, about grammar and about spelling and punctuation and so forth. I mean, think about it. What if you lived in England, Dennis? You're going to spell theater with an E at the end instead of before the last R. I mean, I would. So it's a real interesting process. We're talking with Dennis Henson, and we're talking about not only the book Real Impact, Daily Inspiration. We're also talking today about the legend of Rudy, which we're going to get into in just a moment as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. Welcome back to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan along with Dennis Henson, and we are talking about the story in his book, Real Impact, Daily Inspiration, available through realimpactbook.com. The story of Rudy, and we heard it in our last segment there, but it's to me interesting how sports stories seem to, even for people who don't understand that particular game, the message still seems to come through, doesn't it?
It does. It does because sports seems to fit in with what we're trying to do with the book. In order to be successful in sports, it's the same thing as being successful in everything else. You have to be able to develop skills and become really good at those skills. You have to have persistence. You have to have a positive mental attitude. So sports stories fit into this type book. I think there's probably 5 stories in this book that have to do with sports, and they're all exciting. Even if you don't understand the sport, the way the story is written, it kind of explains what's going on and makes it easier to understand. This is not really a sports story. It's a story about a boy who wanted to play on a team,
Mm-hmm.
and he really didn't have anything that would make him desirable for that team.
Mm.
And it was one of the most famous teams that ever played the sport. And he was too small. He didn't have very good grades. He didn't have any money. He could afford to pay to go to the school. He just had so many obstacles in front of him that most people would have just said, yeah, well, that would be nice, but I don't think I can do it. But not Rudy.
Mm.
Even
Mm.
though his family was from a big family, and all of his brothers and his parents, all of his friends, his teachers, everyone told him what he wanted was impossible. He was crazy. There was no way he was ever going to get what his dream was. But that just didn't deter Rudy. And that's why the story is so special.
In most stories, there is a hero or heroine, and then there's the protagonist. I'll use that word. I like that one better than anything else. But a lot of times there is no uh, physical person as a protagonist. And in a manner of speaking, with Rudy, it was more, I would say, more the system than it was the individuals who turned him down, who said, no, you're not going to fit. I mean, yeah, we could label them as such, but it was more the protocol of the sport that he wanted to play, how badly he wanted to do it. And he kept being told no because of the protocol, if you will, what was required of members of the team to have, the qualities, if you will, right?
That's right. He had lots of things going against him. First of all, to attend Notre Dame is very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of having money, it was a big family, and his parents were poor. So how could he afford to go to Notre Dame without a scholarship? And he didn't have the grades to get in. Plus, even if he got in and could afford it, he was very short. Notre Dame had people from, and still they're playing for the national championship this year. I just found that out today.
Mm.
Well, they had athletes from all over. You know, in my little high school in Northeast Alabama, we played the Notre Dame fight song. So every Catholic school in the nation that had a band played the Notre Dame fight song. Everyone that is Catholic relates to the school. So every athlete throughout the United States that's Catholic or went to a Catholic school probably wanted to go to Notre Dame. And many of those athletes were much bigger and built better and had a more going for them than Rudy. What Rudy had going for him was he had a dream, and nothing was going to stop him from reaching his dream. He had faith, he had hope, he had desire, and the will to take action, which is, the underlying theme of the story is desire, faith, hope, will, and action. And that was Rudy. And that's why his story got put in the book.
I can kind of relate to that only from the standpoint that it wasn't the outside world that, was the protagonist per se, but it was my inside world. I was telling myself at times, I can't do this. I mean, for example, I was trying to get a driver's license to drive in my 30s, late 20s, early 30s, to drive just a moped. All I wanted to do was get around town a little faster on a moped. What's the big deal? Well, the state of Arizona thought it was a big deal, and so they wouldn't give it to me. Of course, I didn't know about what's called the medical review program until I moved. Well, actually, no, I take that back because I did have a license in Arizona until we moved to California. But it was more those internal messages. Do you find that? Obviously, Rudy didn't have that internal protagonist; he had the external. But do you find that a lot of us, that's kind of what happens to us, even though we may not get those messages from family and parents, and I wish I knew where it was coming from, but we start telling ourselves that we can't.
Richard, I think that's the norm. I think it's normal for people to have negative thoughts and think, well, I would love to do this, but for the money or the connections or the education. They tell themselves a number of reasons why it won't work, and then they convince themselves it won't, and they're right, it won't. As long as they're convinced it won't, it really won't. But if they change that around, and that's really what Real Impact Daily Inspiration is to help you to do, is to change your stinking thinking, as Zig Ziglar would say, to something that smells better. And so that you tell yourself, this is what I want, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And over in the book, you see these, the actual protagonist is the key person in the book, telling themselves, this is what I want, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes in order to get there. And so if someone listening to this can just take that and say, well, maybe if I change my thinking a little bit, I'll be able to get this thing that I've really always wanted to accomplish. A lot of people come into my office that want to become real estate investors, and they have this negative attitude. Well, the banks won't loan me any money. And I'll ask them, well, how many banks have you asked to loan you any money? And they'll say one or two. And I said, well, go back out there and ask 100 banks and then come back and tell me that you can't get the money.
Mm-hmm.
There's plenty of banks out there and they want to loan you the money.
Right.
I mean, that's how they make their living.
Exactly.
And our lesson number 5 in real estate training is all the money you'll ever need. I give them specific things to do and places to go, people to see. And I've had students come back in 1 week with $250,000 in credit, when the week before they were thinking they couldn't possibly get any money anywhere ever. So one of the biggest problems that people need to overcome is self-doubt. Well, with Real Impact Daily Inspiration, you're looking at people who had no business becoming successful, becoming extremely successful because they had a belief that they could do it and had eliminated their self-doubt.
Well, I'll tell you, folks, it's something that you're going to want to check into, and that is just that. The book, Real Impact Daily Inspiration. It's available through realimpactbook.com. We hope you will get a copy of it. Share it with your family, your friends. Maybe if you have a family, maybe family night kind of thing. And maybe each night have one of the kids read a chapter, a story, if you will. Maybe go through some of the quotes and talk about what they mean to you, that kind of thing. It's a great opportunity for us all to rise up above, and we'll continue to rise as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. We are here on Tell Me Your Story with our very special guest for this series, Dennis Henson, and Real Impact. RealImpactBook.com is the website to go to. You'll have an opportunity to maybe pick up a copy, your own copy, hardcover, paperback, or Kindle of the book, Real Impact. I hope that you will do that. And as well, tune in to our series every Wednesday here at 8 a.m. following the news, and I think you're going to be extraordinarily enlightened by it. I'm actually searching through. There was an email, or actually a text, that was sent to me by a good friend of mine, and he was actually a neighbor. And if I find it, fine. If not, then you know what? There you go. It's not a big deal, but I can paraphrase. The gentleman's name that I'm thinking of, his name was Dana, lived next door to me and my family. They had a family of 9 kids. 9 kids, all right? They beat us out by 3. Anyway, we all played together as kids growing up, you know, and had a lot of fun. When I got in contact with Dana's brother, and we were chatting away, and of course, over the course of time, he spoke with his brother. Hey, I've been talking with Richard, you remember we used to live next door to them and everything. He said, oh, and he sent a text back to his brother, who then shared it with me, about how impressed Dana was with my ability to run and play and do everything else that everybody else was doing, in spite of or because I was legally blind. I mean, he expressed that he was so impressed by that. And sometimes, Dennis, don't we minimize our ability to inspire other people? We don't even realize sometimes that we're doing that. For me, when I read that, I'm going, well, I was just living my life as a kid. It was no big deal to me. But obviously, it touched him in such a way that he shared those sentiments. What do you think about that?
I think it's important to do the best you can at everything you do. I'm getting older, when you're approaching the age of 80, you realize you're not going to be here for a whole lot longer. And you start thinking about, well, what are people going to think about me once I'm gone? One of the reasons I wrote this book is that it's a legacy. I was listening to Napoleon Hill 2 days ago. It was an old recording, and he was talking about Think and Grow Rich and saying, this book that I've written has inspired millions and will continue to inspire millions for years to come. And I thought, boy, isn't that interesting that he knew that while he was alive? Because I've often thought, did Socrates have any idea that people would still be quoting him hundreds and hundreds of years after he's gone and letting what he said inspire them? I wonder if, just think of the great philosophers over these past many, many years. And I wonder how many of them, of course, I'm sure that was Jesus's goal. Jesus was, leaving a legacy, and he intended and actually spoke it and said, go and teach all nations, that he expected that to happen, and it happened.
Yeah.
It's amazing how powerful your mind and your expectations and your desires are, and what they can change. And when you really come down to it, everything physical that you see, whether it be a house or a computer or a monitor or a desk, at some point, someone thought, well, I need to make a copier, and there it sits. It turned from a thought into an actual object. If you can turn that around and think, I can think of something right now, and it can become reality. And that's kind of what Rudy did. He told everyone when he was in high school, his coaches, his teachers, his friends, his parents, his brothers, and they all laughed at him. I am going to play for Notre Dame. I'm going to put on that golden helmet. I'm going to get out there on that field, and nothing is going to stop me. And they laughed at him, and they told him it was impossible. That's why that's such a powerful story of all the guy had to go through, being, he couldn't get into Notre Dame. He had to go to a junior college. He continued to apply, and he continued to get rejected. But he continued to study. He did, and even after he got in, that was just getting in was hard. But once he got in, this little short guy, how's he going to get on the team? There's people from all over the United States, 5-star players in line, waiting in line to play on that team. How's he going to do that? But he did it. And it's just a great example of what having a burning desire and will and faith can do. You can do the impossible. And Rudy did the impossible.
And my understanding was that his dream wasn't to play for a season, to score a touchdown, to be the hero, this, that. He just, even if it was one play, it didn't matter. If he could play one down, his goal has been met. That's extraordinary.
Exactly. And just like several of the stories, literally, if you could go back to his high school days and go to where he was and take what he had to offer, you would have said it was impossible too. Anybody that's reasonable would have said, no, you're too short, you're too poor, you're too dumb. There's just no way you're going to get into Notre Dame, into the football program, get a uniform, and go out and play a play during a regular game. There's no way it could happen.
Yeah.
And the story of it happening to me is just very uplifting. It says, look, if he can do that, just think what you can do. I mean, you probably don't have all those obstacles in front of you to get to where you want to go.
I mean, at least from the standpoint of the outside world, the material world, we may not. But then again, as we were talking just a little bit ago, we create those internal obstacles, and we need to stop doing it. Cut it out. Just stop creating those barriers. It's just funny how, depending upon what town you live in, most towns and cities are the same way. You've got orange cones and barriers all over the place, finding it very difficult to get from point A to point B. I had that problem a couple of weeks ago when I was going from downtown Santa Barbara back out to the radio station, and I thought I wasn't going to get there in time for my 2 o'clock live show. I made it. I made it in time, but it was like, okay, getting frustrated is not going to help me to get to the other side of town in a timely manner. And I got from the station to that place in downtown Santa Barbara straight through in about 10 minutes. Well, it took me 25, almost 30 minutes to get the other way because of all of the barriers. And isn't that kind of the way life is too? Sometimes if you set the goal, I mean, look at Rudy in this case. If he had set the goal, it doesn't necessarily happen today, and it may not happen tomorrow. But that's where you used a very key word here. You've got to have the faith to believe that it's going to happen, and then you take the action, right?
Exactly. The book, Real Impact Daily Inspiration, was written to help people get over the hump by taking the book, reading the introduction, and then the little part that says how to use this book, and adopting that as part of your life will change the trajectory of anyone's life. It will change how much money they have in the bank, where they live, who they get to be with, where they get to go. My wife loves to take, we travel a lot. We go 4 or 5 vacations a year and go to these exotic places, and it's a lot of fun. Well, you don't get to do that unless you've had some success and have, accumulated some resources in order to do that. Where I came from, my father was a disabled veteran. I hear these people talking about being poor, and I thought, well, man, I was a lot more poor than that. And I was telling this story one time, and there was this little girl from Vietnam who was in one of my real estate classes, and she was more successful than me. And I was telling about how poor I was, and she was just nodding her head. And I said, would you like to say something? And then she told about where she came from. She grew up during the war. They were having a war. She had 9 brothers and sisters. They didn't have anything to eat. They didn't have any place to live. They were, refugees. And I thought, wow, man, I wasn't poor. I mean, it's your perspective.
Yeah.
But anyway, I've come a long way from having a comfortable poor childhood to being able to do a lot of things. And one of the reasons is what's in this book. I read 3 books that changed my life. I read Think and Grow Rich, Success, the Glenn Bland Method, and The Greatest Salesman in the World. And my whole world changed. It turned on a dime. And then all of a sudden I was able to, by using what I learned in those books, I was able to accomplish pretty much anything I ever set my mind to. And
So-
it's a good, anybody else can too.
Mm-hmm. And that really exemplifies that phrase that we've probably heard as kids by our parents: go to the library, read a book, and expand your horizons. And it's funny, as much difficulty as I had reading as a kid growing up. Yeah, I had audibles, if you will, back then, talking books and recordings for the blind. But I did love, there was one book in particular that I picked up, and I was up until 2 or 3 in the morning one morning reading this paperback, and it was a thick paperback written by, I believe it was Frank Herbert. and it was called the Prometheus Project. It was science fiction. And for me, it wasn't, I get to hold the book with two hands and I read it. No, I had to hold that thick old book with one hand, hold my magnifying glass with the other to read the story that kept me going until 2 or 3 in the morning. That's how intriguing that was to me. And I'm hoping that, first of all, you can get it in audible form, so you don't need a magnifying glass, but you can certainly get a print version as well by going to realimpactbook.com. We hope you will do that as we continue talking with Dennis Henson, author of, compiler of a section in that book, the 50 years of quotes. We'll talk about that as well as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. Welcome back to Tell Me Your Story as we are just about set to wrap things up here. Dennis, I just am so intrigued by our ability to change our lives, to transform our lives through, some would say, seemingly easy ways of doing that. And the reality is they really are easy. Your first best suggestion, you mentioned this in our interview and you've mentioned it over and over again in this series of programs, is read something every day, something uplifting, inspiring, etc., etc. And it doesn't have to be long, okay? I know that in your book, you've got a story about Abraham Lincoln that we'll get into, and it's a long story, but it's broken up into sections. Or read one of the shorter stories, or go read some of the poetry or some of the quotes. But read something every day makes the biggest difference in the world, doesn't it?
It does. First of all, if you set a goal, you got to know where you're going. So you need to say, well, I want to become an attorney. That's what Abraham Lincoln did. Once he got into a courtroom, he felt at home. He said, I'm going to do whatever it takes to become an attorney. Well, Abraham Lincoln had less than a first grade education, and thinking that he was going to become an attorney and pass the bar, that was a pretty big dream and desire, but he did it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can too, but the book is designed to help you understand that. You can't use the book. It's kind of like Aladdin's lamp. Aladdin's lamp was worthless unless you rubbed it, and then what did you have to do? You had to make a wish.
Right.
If you didn't make a wish, you didn't get anything.
There you go.
So that's why the book has Aladdin's lamp on the front of it. It's like that. You've got to wish for something first, and then the book's going to help you get it.
Mm-hmm.
And it may take a little time, but the success is the trip.
Mm-hmm.
You feel so good when you are accomplishing something really every single day, moving you closer and closer. Getting to the goal is not the fun. It's the trip of getting there.
Yeah.
Where it's fun. You have all of these wins and wins and wins and wins. Well, I'm a big Alabama fan. When they win the national championship, I'm just, that's wonderful. The next day, you say, well, so now what? We've won. Now we got to start all over for next year, and you're looking forward to the next football season. I'm sure every football fan is the same way, not just Alabama fans, but that's how it is in life. But it's a much bigger game, and the rewards are much more, much greater for you personally than just winning the national championship. But I do enjoy that.
Absolutely. Oh no, hey, let's not take that away from you. I had two seasons, 2 years, one in the 70s and one in the early 90s, where as the phrase goes from Don Adams, from his role as Get Smart, missed it by that much, with the Phoenix Suns going after a championship in the 70s against Boston and then in the 90s against Chicago. And it's like, come on. So for us, it was always, there's always next year, and we're still waiting. But with the Arizona Diamondbacks, they were only in play for 4 years, and they won their World Series rings. And I could say I'm from a World Series town. And for me, that was a big deal, because and it was exciting because I love baseball. I love the sport of baseball. We got to wrap things up here, Dennis. Thank you so much. This has been great. We got more that we're going to be bringing folks over the coming weeks and months. And it's always a pleasure to have you here to talk about the work that you've put together through Real Impact Daily Inspirations. Folks, don't forget to go to realimpactbook.com and get yours today. So, Dennis, thanks again. We'll look forward to talking with you next week.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate you having me.
And I thank you, folks. We appreciate you for listening and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. To my dear friend, my best friend of 53 years, went through grade school, high school, college together, Doug. I called him Smokey. I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend, Zorro, aho, aho.